Hi there, my name's Brendan Davis, and depending on which podcast you're listening to, this is either If I Knew You Better or, surprise, Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. More on that in just a sec. Okay, welcome to my March solo podcast. I'm going to keep this one pretty short and sweet. I have several things to say, but I will not belabor the point too much. First of all, the reason I mentioned both of those podcasts up front is that my original podcast, Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, I've retired it. I've briefly resurrected it a few times, and it's been more or less retired for a while now. But I've been thinking a lot about how it can function as a channel to talk about a lot of things related to the situation in China, and I have some thoughts on that. But first, about If I Knew You Better. I love this podcast, and I started it when I wanted to get away from doing such a China-centric show. I already have How China Works, which is a co-hosted show with my co-host Ying Li, and that's ongoing. We have a brand new interview that's also going up today, the same day this is releasing anyway. And that's a lot of fun and very rewarding, but it has a bit more of a business focus, and frankly, it's a bit of a kind of a straighter show. It's a little more, that show is a bit more LinkedIn, and this show is a little bit more, I don't know. This show is a peculiar little beast, but it wanders into some places, and I keep it. It's actually structured when I have a guest, believe it or not, but it is much more of an unedited freeform conversation based around an outline and some bullet points that I talk about with the guest before we actually start recording. So If I Knew You Better, when I started it, it was really meant to be a global version of Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, right? So a long-form, in-depth interview show, me with a guest, and really getting into things, people's origin stories, their journey to how they became who they are, and then what they're doing now that's interesting, and talking about all kinds of things along the way. So that is going to remain, but I'm going to make a few changes. I'm going to add a few more elements to If I Knew You Better's portfolio, if you will. One thing I'm going to do is mix those interviews with new people alongside talks with returning guests coming back, and even some panel shows where I get a group of guests to look into more relevant topics of the day, things that I want to discuss and get into the weeds with, and I'm going to find the best people I can to talk about things with. And I'm going to start integrating that actually pretty soon. I believe next week's show is going to reflect that direction. As far as Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, I have decided to reboot that show, and I'm bringing it back in part to do a weekly catch-up and check-in with people I care about and friends and colleagues who are dealing with the COVID-19 situation around the world, but I'll have an emphasis on China on that show, on Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. So we're going to talk about lessons that were learned there that can hopefully add some perspective and be useful to everyone else as we sort of catch up with what they were dealing with a couple of months ago. And my goal on the Big Fish reboot is to provide a voice and an outlet to the fears, but also focus on the common humanity and deal with important questions and topics as things develop. And it's not just COVID-19 related, but that is the starting point for this. Now, as far as How China Works and the impact of all this, that show is ongoing. Ying and I have always refined that format and made tweaks as things evolve and as time passes. And the reality right now is that with us in two very different time zones, it is a little more difficult to coordinate ourselves. And this week's interview on How China Works with Bill Reichert is a great example. He's someone who would be perfect for me to have talked to, but I could not join the call just because of the timing, and I was in the middle of traveling at the time. So in terms of how Big Fish is differentiated, that reboot is meant to provide an outlet for me to really get into issues in ways that don't fit the How China Works format very well. And frankly, that will provide me some freedom to do so and say things without towing as China-sensitive a line regarding a given topic. I need to keep How China Works segmented from these other two podcasts a bit, both to differentiate them all and make them all worth listening to. But I also want to keep that show clean of any blowback from things that we might discuss on Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom and the way we may discuss them. Now, I'm more of a panda hugger than a slugger. I'm not going to start bashing China. I'm also not doing PR for China. And that's not our goal with How China Works either. But I should say that because Ying is Chinese and of course I'm American, sometimes we have to really walk a line of détente or diplomacy, which I appreciate in that context. That's kind of the point of that show, actually. But I need an outlet where I don't censor myself. And I get into things that sometimes don't interest my co-host or would not be useful to talk about with a given guest. And so, especially as we're all about to have a lot of time to catch up and listen to podcasts, I thought this was a really good time to give the Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom reboot a shot. I've considered it a few times, and we're going to go for it now. So thanks for listening to this. There are links in the show notes to all 3 of the podcasts, so you can check out the library, see people we've talked about or topics that have been covered before, see what might interest you. I appreciate you listening to this. Again, I'm Brendan Davis. Stay safe, stay sane, and I'll see you next week on If I Knew You Better and Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, and hopefully How China Works. But there's a new one today. Check that out. Thanks.